billionaire CEO was ruined by the hacker attack, until the pizza delivery girl wrote 3 lines of code and silenced the board of directors. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what is the most unexpected skill you've ever seen someone have? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy! The massive monitors that lined the walls of the Vance Innovations boardroom were bleeding. A river of cryptic, pulsing red code flowed across financial charts, confidential projects, and the very soul of the company. A digital serpent devouring a decade of work in a matter of hours. "Talk to me, Peterson. What do we have?" Damien Vance's voice was a low growl, a stark contrast to the high-pitched panic that filled the 80th floor war room. He stood, impeccable in his tailored suit, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed the fury roiling beneath the surface. Peterson, the head of cybersecurity and a man paid an obscene amount of money to prevent exactly this, was sweating through his expensive shirt. "It's a Chimera-class ransomware, sir. It's every countermeasure we deploy. It adapts. It's learning. It's boxing us in." "So, you're telling me that our multi-million-dollar defense system is being outsmarted by a line of code?" Damien asked, his voice dangerously calm. "It's not just code, sir," a younger programmer stammered, his face pale. "It's a ghost. We can't even trace its origin." On the central screen, a countdown timer pulsed in sync with the destructive code. 48. Below it, a simple, arrogant message. $50 million in crypto. Or the ghost becomes a god and wipes your world clean. It was at that exact moment, the apex of their corporate apocalypse, that the heavy glass door to the boardroom slid open with a soft hiss. A young woman stood in the doorway, wearing a slightly too large Pizza Palace polo shirt and a baseball cap that had seen better days. She was holding a stack of 3 pizza boxes, the glorious non-corporate smell of pepperoni and garlic suddenly filling the sterile, panicked air. "Pizza for Vance Innovations?" She read uncertainly from a crumpled receipt. 20 pairs of terrified, high-strung eyes turned to stare at her. It was as if a songbird had just flown into the middle of a shark tank. "Not now," Peterson snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "Get out, we're in the middle of a catastrophe." The pizza girl, Maya Cruz, didn't move. Her observant, intelligent eyes took in the scene. The panicked faces, the frantic typing, and the river of red code devouring the screens. She tilted her head, a small, curious smirk playing on her lips. "Wow," she said, her voice a calm, unimpressed island in the sea of chaos. "Looks like someone's having a bad Tuesday." She took a step into the room, her gaze fixed on the central monitor. "A chimera worm, huh? That's an old-school choice, kind of a retro vibe. I dig it." The room went dead silent. The frantic typing stopped. Peterson's jaw hung open. Damien, who had been on the verge of ordering security to physically remove her, froze. What did you just say?" Peterson stammered, pointing a shaky finger at the screen. "I said it's a chimera worm," Maya repeated, shifting the weight of the pizzas. "Aggressive entry, but it has a tell. It always leaves a backdoor signature in the kernel registry. It's sloppy. The programmer is arrogant. He thinks no one will ever get past the main attack to even look for it." Damien stared at her. He looked at her worn-out sneakers, the smudge of flour on her cheek, and the complete and utter lack of fear in her eyes. He was desperate. He was watching his empire crumble in real time. In a moment of pure, unadulterated madness, he made a decision. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Can you stop it?" Maya looked from his desperate, piercing blue eyes to the screens, then back again. She shrugged. "Probably. But my current job description involves mozzarella and timely delivery, not saving billion-dollar companies from their own terrible security." Peterson let out a choked, incredulous laugh. "Sir, you can't be serious. She delivers pizzas." "And you, Peterson," Damien shot back, his patience gone, "are the man who let this happen. You've had 6 hours and have accomplished nothing." He turned his full attention to Maya, his eyes intense. "Name your price." Maya blinked, surprised by the directness of the question. She thought of her dream, the small, cozy bakery she had been sketching plans for since she was a teenager. The dream that was always just out of reach, always one financial disaster away from becoming impossible. She looked at the faces of the board members who had started to gather at the back of the room. their expressions a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. She gave a small, almost mischievous smile. 200,000, she said, the number popping into her head, a figure that felt both insane and exactly right. It was the exact amount she needed to buy the small, retired bakery space she'd been eyeing for a year. A murmur went through the boardroom. Peterson scoffed. She's bluffing. Done, Damien said without a moment's hesitation. If you stop that worm in its tracks, the money is yours by the end of the day. Maya's confident smirk wavered for a fraction of a second. She hadn't actually expected him to agree. But she quickly recovered, her expression turning all business. Fine, she said, setting the pizzas down on the edge of the massive conference table. But somebody better pay for these pizzas, and I'm getting a big tip. She walked past the stunned engineers, pulled up an empty chair to the main console, and cracked her knuckles. The sound echoed in the silent room. The men who had been failing for hours leaned in, watching with a mix of disdain and fascination. Maya's fingers didn't just type, they flew. It was a blur of motion, a symphony of keystrokes that was both elegant and brutally efficient. She wasn't fighting the worm. She wasn't trying to build a wall against it. She was doing something far more clever. She's not attacking it, one of the younger programmers whispered in awe. She's talking to it. Maya was exploiting the worm's sloppy backdoor signature, using the hacker's own arrogance against them. She wasn't building a defense. She was writing a new command, a simple, elegant piece of logic. She typed one line of code, a command to isolate the worm's core directive. She typed a second line, a command to redefine its primary target from Vance Innovations' data to itself. Then she typed the third and final line, a simple, beautiful, and utterly lethal command. Execute. She hit the Enter key. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The red river of code continued its destructive flow. Peterson almost smiled. And then, the serpent on the screen began to eat its own tail. The red code started to corrupt itself, folding in on its own logic, erasing its path. The locked files began to unlock. The countdown timer flickered, distorted, and then vanished. The screens all flashed green. In the center of each, a single beautiful word appeared in clean white text. Restored. Maya leaned back in her chair, stretched her arms above her head, and let out a small, satisfied sigh. She turned to face the room of completely, utterly dumbfounded executives. There, she said, a triumphant smirk on her face. All fixed. She stood up, brushed off her jeans, and walked back to the now cold pizza boxes. Now, about that $200,000? Damien Vance could only stare. He had just witnessed a miracle, and it had been delivered by a pizza girl. He walked slowly towards her, his mind struggling to process the sheer, impossible reality of what he had just seen. The board members were murmuring in shocked whispers. Peterson looked like he'd seen a ghost. The money will be in your account within the hour, Damien said, his voice a low, awestruck rumble. Just tell me where to send it. Maya pulled a crumpled napkin from her pocket, scribbled down her bank details with a pen she borrowed from a stunned-looking programmer, and handed it to him. Here you go. It was a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Vance. She picked up the pizza boxes. These are on the house, she said with a wink. Consider it a complimentary appetizer for your newly saved company. She turned and walked towards the door, her worn-out sneakers squeaking softly on the polished marble floor. She was leaving. Just like that. After performing a digital miracle, she was just going to walk out of their lives forever. Wait, Damien called out, the word escaping him before he could stop it. She paused at the door, looking back at him over her shoulder. I don't even know your name, he said. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her entire face and made his heart do a strange, unfamiliar flip. It's Maya, she said. Maya Cruz. And I have a feeling you won't be forgetting it anytime soon. The glass door slid shut behind her, leaving Damien Vance standing in the middle of his saved boardroom, surrounded by the most powerful people in his company. Feeling for the first time in his life like he had just met someone who was infinitely more powerful than all of them combined. He looked at the crumpled napkin in his hand, at the looping, confident handwriting, and knew, with an unshakable certainty, that this was not the last time he would see Maya Cruz. He couldn't let it be. He had just saved his company, but he had a strange, compelling feeling that he had just found something far more valuable. The next morning, Damien Vance sat in his cavernous office on the 80th floor, staring at the city below, but seeing none of it. The corporate crisis was over. The hackers had been neutralized, the data was secure, and a press release praising the company's robust and innovative security response was already drafted. By all accounts, he should have been celebrating. Instead, he was obsessed. He hadn't slept. All night, his mind had replayed the events in the boardroom, but it wasn't the code or the averted disaster that held his attention. It was her, Maya Cruz. The way she had walked in, completely unfazed by the chaos. The way her eyes, sharp and intelligent, had dissected the problem in seconds. The smirk on her face when she called the hacker's code sloppy. And the sad, weary strength in her voice when she talked about dropping out of MIT for her grandmother. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His money, his influence, his name. Maya had wanted 47.50 cents for the pizzas and a tip, and then she had walked away. "Sir?" His assistant, a perpetually nervous man named Arthur, peeked into the office. "The board is waiting for the final report on the breach." "Cancel it," Damien said without turning from the window. "Cancel the board meeting, sir." Arthur squeaked, looking as if Damien had just suggested they replace the office furniture with live alligators. "Find out everything you can about a woman named Maya Cruz," Damien commanded, his voice low and intense. "I want to know where she lives, where she works, and what she does when she's not saving my company." "And Arthur?" "Yes, sir?" "Be discreet. Very discreet." 3 weeks later, Maya stood in front of a small, dusty, and utterly perfect storefront in a quiet corner of Brooklyn. A faded sign above the door read "For Sale." It was the old Miller's Bakery, a neighborhood institution that had closed down a year ago after the owners retired. It was her dream. The $200,000 from Vance Innovations sat in her bank account, a number so large it still felt like a typo. It was enough. It was more than enough. She was so lost in her thoughts, imagining the smell of fresh bread and coffee, that she didn't notice the sleek black car that pulled up silently to the curb. "Thinking of buying?" A deep, familiar voice said from behind her. Maya jumped, spinning around. Damien Vance was leaning against his car, dressed not in a power suit but in a simple dark sweater and jeans. He looked impossibly out of place on the quiet tree-lined street. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was a mix of shock, suspicion, and a jolt of something else she wasn't ready to name. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, a lie so blatant it was almost charming. He gestured towards the bakery. "This place, it's for sale." "I know," she said, her tone guarded. "How did you find me?" "You're a hard person to forget, Maya," he said, his gaze steady. He pushed himself off the car and walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. "You told me you wanted to open a bakery. I had my real estate team look for available properties that fit the description of cozy and full of soul." He gave a small, almost shy smile. This one seemed to fit. Maya crossed her arms, a shield against the confusing warmth that was spreading through her chest. "So you had your people spy on me?" "I had my people do market research," he corrected smoothly. "I was thinking of investing in the artisanal baking sector, and that it's a growth market." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Right. The billionaire CEO of a global tech firm is suddenly interested in cupcakes, and I suppose your being here at this exact bakery at this exact moment is just a happy coincidence?" "I'm a big believer in happy coincidences," he said, his eyes twinkling. He looked at the old bakery, then back at her. "So are you going to do it? Are you going to buy it?" "That's the plan," she said, her voice still cautious. "It's what I'm using the consulting fee for." "Good," he said with a decisive nod. "It's a solid investment." They stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the chasm between their two worlds stretching between them. She was a girl from Queens, about to pour her life savings into a small neighborhood bakery. He was a man who could buy the entire block without checking his bank balance. "Why are you really here, Damien?" she asked, her voice softer now. He sighed, dropping the corporate facade. The playful glint in his eyes was replaced by something more vulnerable, more honest. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you walked out of that boardroom." Her breath hitched. "Because," he continued, taking a step closer. "I've spent the last 3 weeks surrounded by the most brilliant minds in my company, and all I can think about is a pizza girl who is smarter than all of them combined." "I'm not a pizza girl anymore," she said, her voice a near whisper. "I know," he said. "You're a woman who's about to build her own dream, and I'd like to see it." He hesitated. Maybe be your first customer?" Maya looked at him, at this powerful, complicated man who looked so out of place and yet so completely sincere. Her instincts, the ones honed by years of struggle and self-reliance, were screaming at her to run. He was dangerous. Not because he was cruel, but because he was the first person in a long time who made her feel like she could trust someone. "The coffee will be expensive," she said, a challenge in her voice. He smiled, a slow, brilliant smile that made her stomach do a backflip. "I think I can afford it." Just then, her phone rang. It was the real estate agent. "Hello? Yes, this is Maya Cruz. Yes, I'll take it." She listened for a moment, her face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. "Really? It's mine? Thank you so much." She hung up and turned to Damien, her professional caution completely forgotten, her face a beacon of pure happiness. "I got it," she squealed, jumping up and down once. "It's mine. I have a bakery." On pure impulse, she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. He was startled for a second. Then his own arms wrapped her, holding her close. She smelled of cinnamon and something uniquely, wonderfully Maya. For a moment, he forgot he was a CEO, forgot the world of code and contracts. He was just a man, holding a woman who was radiating pure joy. She pulled back abruptly, her face flushing as she realized what she'd done. "Sorry," she mumbled, stepping back. "Got a little carried away." "Don't be," he said, his voice a little rough. "It was nice." She looked down, suddenly shy. "Well, I should go. Papers to sign, plans to make." "Of course," he said, stepping back to give her space. "Maya?" She looked up. "Congratulations on the bakery," he said, his voice full of a warmth that had nothing to do with business. "They're lucky to have you." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile this time. "Thank you, Damien." She turned and walked away, her steps light, her mind already buzzing with recipes and decoration ideas. Damien watched her go, a feeling he couldn't quite name blooming in his chest. It was more than admiration, more than curiosity. He had come here today under the guise of market research, but he knew the truth. He was investing. Not in the artisanal baking sector, but in the hope that he could be a part of her world. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit, expensive bar in Midtown, Peterson was nursing a glass of scotch, his face a mask of bitter resentment. He had been fired, humiliated. His career, which he had meticulously built over 2 decades, was in ruins, and it was all because of her. "The pizza girl. She thinks she won," he muttered to the man sitting across from him, a sleazy tabloid journalist named Rick. "It's a great story," Rick said, a greedy glint in his eye. "Billionaire saved by a working-class hero. People eat that stuff up." "She's no hero," Peterson spat. "She's a fraud, a college dropout who got lucky. And I'm gonna prove it." He slid a thick envelope across the table. "That's everything I have on her. Her old addresses, her work history, the details about her grandmother, and some creative additions, enough to paint a very different picture of our little Miss Sunshine." Rick picked up the envelope, weighing it in his hand. "What's the angle?" Peterson smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "The angle is simple. She didn't just happen to be there that day. She was part of the hack. She played the hero to get the reward money." He leaned in. "We're not just going to ruin her reputation. We're going to turn the entire city against her, and when she falls, Damien Vance will fall with her." The first week of owning the Old Miller's Bakery was a whirlwind of sawdust, the smell of fresh paint, and the dawning, terrifying realization that Maya had no idea how to renovate a building. She was a genius with code and a master with cake batter, but when it came to plumbing and electrical wiring, she was hopelessly lost. "Okay," she said to herself, staring at a wall she'd just attempted to paint. It was a streaky, uneven mess that looked less like a fresh coat and more like a modern art piece titled Despair in Beige. "Maybe I should stick to what I know." It was during her third failed attempt to assemble a simple shelving unit that the bell above the shop door jingled. Damien Vance walked in, dressed in jeans and a Henley shirt that probably cost more than her entire toolbox. He looked around at the chaotic scene, paint cans, drop cloths, and a very frustrated Maya wrestling with a piece of IKEA furniture, and smiled. "Need a hand?" he asked, the amusement clear in his voice. "Only if your hands come with a degree in engineering and a user manual for this Swedish torture device," she grumbled, kicking the half-assembled shelf. He laughed, a real easy sound. "I don't have an engineering degree, but I did build a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. I think I can handle a bookshelf." He couldn't. What followed was an hour of the most comically inept construction work the world had ever seen. Damien, a man who could orchestrate a global product launch from his phone, was utterly defeated by a set of Allen wrenches. He put shelves in upside down, screwed bolts into the wrong holes, and at one point managed to get his sleeve caught in a drawer slide. You're really bad at this," Maya said, laughing so hard she had to sit on a paint can. "In my defense," he said, struggling to free his arm, "my usual method for assembling furniture involves calling a man named Sven who does it for me." "Well, Sven's not here," she giggled, finally taking pity on him and showing him how to read the diagram. They worked side by side, their earlier awkwardness melting away in a shared cloud of sawdust and paint fumes. He was clumsy, but he was trying, and there was something incredibly endearing about seeing the powerful CEO look so completely lost. "So," he said, handing her a screw, "what are you going to call this place, Maya's Miracles?" "I was thinking something a little more me," she said, her expression turning thoughtful. "I'm calling it the Sweet Bite." Damien paused, the screwdriver halfway to the hole. "The Sweet Bite," he repeated, a slow smile spreading across his face. "As in BYTE? "Yep," she said, a proud twinkle in her eye. "A little nod to my other life, a place where sugar meets silicon." "That's brilliant, Maya," he said, looking at her with genuine admiration. "Absolutely brilliant." The moment was warm, comfortable, and felt dangerously close to something real. Their easy partnership, however, hit a wall. A literal bureaucratic wall. "They're denying the permit?" Maya said into her phone a week later, her voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "But why? I submitted all the paperwork." She was sitting on an overturned bucket in the middle of the half-finished bakery, her dream suddenly hitting a snag. She had spent days navigating the city's labyrinthine permit process, only to be told there was a zoning issue, a historical building code violation, a dozen pieces of red tape she didn't understand. "It's going to take months to appeal," she groaned, hanging up the phone and burying her face in her hands. "I'll be out of money by then." She was so wrapped in her despair that she didn't hear Damien walk in until he was standing in front of her. "Permit trouble?" he asked, his voice calm. She looked up, her eyes filled with frustration. "Trouble is an understatement. It's a nightmare. They're saying I need 3 different kinds of approvals, and one of them requires a historical impact study. It's impossible." Damien didn't say, "I'll pay for it." He didn't say, "I'll handle it." He knew she would reject any offer that felt like charity. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "John, it's Damien Vance. Good. Listen, I have a small business venture I'm consulting on in Brooklyn. We're hitting some zoning snags. Yes, 24 Maple Street. Can you look into it? See what the real issue is. Thanks." He hung up and looked at Maya, who was watching him with a suspicious frown. "Who's John?" "John is a very persuasive lawyer who specializes in making bureaucratic headaches disappear," Damien said simply. "He owes me a favor." "I'm not asking you to use your connections for me, Damien," she said, her pride flaring. "You're not," he said, his gaze steady. "I am. Consider it a pro bono consultation for my favorite artisanal baking investment." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Let him make one call. If it doesn't work, we'll do it your way. Deal?" She hesitated, then sighed. She was out of options. Deal. The next morning Maya's phone rang. It was the city permits office. "Miss Cruz? We're calling to inform you that there was a clerical error regarding your application. All your permits have been approved. You can pick them up this afternoon." Maya was speechless. She hung up the phone and just stared into space. One call. That's all it had taken him. The feeling was a confusing mix of immense gratitude and a touch of resentment at how easily his power could move mountains that she couldn't budge. When he showed up at the bakery later that day, she didn't know what to say. "Thank you," was all she managed, her voice quiet. "You're welcome," he said, not making a big deal of it. He looked around at the newly painted walls. "It's starting to look like a real bakery." "It's starting to feel like one," she admitted, a real, genuine smile finally returning to her face. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together, a comfortable silence settling between them. He helped her carry in boxes of new equipment, and she taught him the difference between a convection oven and a standard one. They were a team. That night, Maya locked up the bakery, her heart full of a cautious optimism. The permits were approved. The renovation was back on track. For the first time, her dream felt truly within reach. As she walked down the quiet street towards the subway, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She was so lost in her happy thoughts that she didn't notice the dark sedan parked across the street, or the figure in the driver's seat watching her with cold, hateful eyes. Peterson lowered his phone, on which he'd just taken a picture of her leaving. "Enjoy it while it lasts, pizza girl," he muttered to himself, "because I'm just getting started." The attack came 2 nights later. Maya was at her apartment, sketching out menu ideas, when her phone buzzed with a notification from the new security system Damien had insisted on installing at the bakery. Motion detected after hours, her blood ran cold. She tried to tell herself it was just a stray cat, a glitch in the system. She pulled up the live camera feed on her phone, her hand shaking. The image that loaded on her screen made her gasp. 2 figures, their faces hidden by hoodies and masks, were inside her bakery. They were moving with a brutal, destructive efficiency. One was spray painting vile, hateful words across her newly painted walls. The other was taking a baseball bat to her beautiful, new glass display case, the sound of shattering glass a sickening crackle even through the phone's tiny speaker. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling as she watched them tear her dream apart. They smashed the espresso machine, overturned bags of flour, and poured what looked like motor oil all over the new wooden floors. It wasn't a robbery. It was pure, vicious destruction. She fumbled to dial 911, her fingers barely working. As she was reporting the break-in, her other line began to ring. It was Damien. She answered, her voice a choked sob. "Maya, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice instantly alert with concern. My bakery," she stammered, tears now streaming down her face. "They're destroying it." "I'm on my way," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Lock your doors, don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." By the time Damien arrived, the police were already there, their flashing blue and red lights painting a chaotic, nightmarish scene. The vandals were gone. Maya was standing on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket a neighbor had given her, staring at the wreckage of her dream, her face a mask of numb disbelief. Damien pushed through the small crowd of onlookers and went straight to her. He didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around her and held her, letting her sob against his chest. He could feel the tremors running through her body, the raw pain of a dream so lovingly built, so cruelly shattered. "It's all gone," she whispered into his sweater. "Everything." "No, it's not," he said, his voice a fierce, protective rumble. "This is just a setback. We'll rebuild it, better than before. I promise." He held her for a long time, a silent anchor in her storm. The police took her statement, but there was little they could do. The vandals had worn masks, and there were no witnesses. But Damien knew. He knew with a cold, sickening certainty who was behind this. This was Peterson's work. He had escalated from corporate sabotage to outright thuggery. After the police left, they stood together in the doorway of the ruined bakery. The smell of spray paint and oil hung heavy in the air. The floor was a wasteland of shattered glass, spilled flour, and broken dreams. "I should have listened to you," Maya said, her voice hollow. "I should have been more careful." "This is not your fault," Damien said, his hands clenching into fists. "This is on me. I brought this into your life. I made him an enemy, and he's taking it out on you." He looked at the wreckage, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "He's going to pay for this, Maya. I swear to you, he will pay." She leaned against him, emotionally and physically exhausted. She didn't have the strength to argue or to be proud. She just needed someone to hold on to. He drove her back to her apartment, the silence in the car thick with a shared grief and a simmering rage. He walked her to her door, his expression grim. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," he said. "I'll be fine," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Maya," he said, his voice softening, He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Let me stay. Not as a boss or an investor, as a friend." She looked into his eyes and saw her own exhaustion and fear mirrored there, but she also saw a deep, steady strength that she found herself desperately needing. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Inside her small apartment, he made her tea while she sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, staring into space. He didn't press her to talk. He just sat in the armchair across from her, a quiet, watchful presence. "My grandmother," she said suddenly, her voice a low murmur. "She used the money from her life insurance to help me with the down payment for the bakery. She said it was her last investment, in me." A fresh wave of sobs shook her body, and I let her down. "No, you didn't," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion. He moved from the chair to the sofa, sitting beside her. "You honored her. You took her belief in you, and you built something beautiful. And you will again." She looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you," he said simply. "And you are not the kind of person who lets monsters win." The vulnerability in her eyes was a raw, open wound. And in that moment, all the professional lines, all the witty banter, all the cautious distance between them, evaporated. There were only two people, raw and hurting, finding solace in each other's presence. He reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the blanket. His touch was warm, grounding. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, her fingers lacing with his. He looked at her, at the tear tracks on her cheeks, at the fierce, resilient spirit that he could still see burning in her eyes, even now. And he was completely overcome. He leaned in, his other hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Maya?" he whispered. This time, there were no ringing phones, no interruptions. There was only the quiet of the small apartment and the soft sound of the rain beginning to fall outside. Their lips met in a kiss that was achingly tender. A kiss that tasted of shared grief, of comfort, of a promise to protect. It wasn't a kiss of explosive passion, but of quiet, profound connection. A kiss that said, "You are not alone in this." When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, their breath mingling in the quiet space between them. "We'll fix this," he murmured against her lips. "I know," she whispered back, and for the first time since she'd seen the wreckage of her bakery, she believed it. The morning after the bakery was destroyed, Maya woke up on the couch in her own apartment. She was wrapped in the blanket Damien had left her, the scent of his cologne still faintly clinging to the fabric. For a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of feeling safe. But then the memory of the shattered glass and spray-painted walls came rushing back, and the safety evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger in her stomach. She didn't feel broken. She felt furious. She showered, put on a clean pair of jeans and a hoodie, and made coffee. As she sipped the strong, black liquid, she wasn't thinking about her losses. She was thinking about revenge. Peterson had made a critical mistake. He hadn't just attacked a building. He had declared war on Maya Cruz, and he had no idea what she was capable of when she was angry. When Damien called, his voice laced with concern, her tone was completely different from the night before. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. "I'm feeling like I need access to a T3 fiber line, 3 networked monitors, and the best damn espresso machine you've got," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum of determination. There was a pause on the other end. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'm done being a victim," she replied, her voice crackling with energy. "He came after my dream. Now I'm coming after his entire pathetic existence. I'm going to find him, Damien. I'm going to find the digital breadcrumb he was stupid enough to leave, and I'm going to dismantle his life, line by line of code." Damien let out a low whistle, a sound of pure, unadulterated admiration. "My office is yours," he said without hesitation. "I'll have my tech team set up whatever you need. The penthouse is secure. No one can get to you there." "Good," she said. "And Damien?" "Yes? Order pizza. It's going to be a long night." By that afternoon, the living room of Damien's penthouse had been transformed into a high-tech command center. 3 massive curved monitors dominated the coffee table, all networked to Maya's souped-up personal laptop. Wires snaked across the floor, and the low hum of processing power filled the air. Damien watched, fascinated, as she worked. This wasn't the same Maya who had fixed his corporate servers. This was someone else. This was Ghost Key, the online persona she had used in hacking competitions, a legend in the underground digital world. Her focus was absolute, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. She moved through firewalls and encrypted servers with a grace and speed that was breathtaking. "So what's the plan, boss?" Damien asked, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. He had happily taken on the role of her support staff, his only jobs being to provide caffeine and stay out of the way. "The plan is to think like a bitter, arrogant, and recently fired middle-aged man," she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Peterson thinks he's smart. He covered his tracks, used anonymous proxies to hire the vandals, paid them in untraceable crypto. On the surface, he's clean." "But," Damien prompted, leaning over her shoulder to look at the screen. He was so close she could feel the warmth of his body, a distracting but not unwelcome presence. "But arrogance has a pattern," she murmured, her eyes scanning lines of data. "He's a creature of habit. He's been sloppy before. I just need to find where." For hours, she hunted. She dug into Peterson's digital life, legally and, when necessary, not so legally. She analyzed his old work emails, his social media, his online purchases. It was a painstaking process of assembling 1,000 tiny, seemingly insignificant pieces of data into a single, coherent picture. Damien watched, completely in awe. He had always defined power by wealth and influence. But watching Maya, he was seeing a different kind of power, the power of pure, focused intellect. "He's hiding behind a shell corporation," Maya said late that night, pointing to a name on the screen. "Phoenix Solutions. He set it up 6 months ago, right after he was demoted. He's been using it to funnel money." "But how do we prove he hired the thugs who destroyed your bakery?" Damien asked. "We don't," she said, a grim smile on her face. "We find the person he hired to do his dirty work, the middleman." She spent another hour diving into the dark corners of the web, places where anonymous contractors offered their services for a price. She cross-referenced IP fragments, tracked ghost accounts, and followed a trail of digital breadcrumbs so faint it was almost invisible. "Got him," she whispered at 3 a.m. Her voice was hoarse with exhaustion, but her eyes were triumphant. On the screen was a profile, a low-level hacker and fixer who went by the online handle Janice. He had a reputation for being cheap, effective, and leaving a trail of digital chaos. "This is our guy," Maya said, her voice electric. "Peterson hired Janice to coordinate the attack on the bakery and probably the initial hack on Vance Innovations. If we can get to Janice, we can get to Peterson." "How do we find him?" Damien asked. Maya's smile was a slow, dangerous thing. "Oh, we don't find him," she said. "We make him come to us." She began to type, her fingers moving with a new, predatory purpose. She wasn't defending anymore. She was attacking. She crafted a piece of code, a digital lure disguised as a lucrative new job offer, and sent it into the network where Janice operated. The lure was embedded with a tracker, so sophisticated it was virtually undetectable. "Now we wait," she said, leaning back in her chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in her tired eyes. They didn't have to wait long. An hour later, a notification pinged. Janice had taken the bait. He had opened the file. "He's in a warehouse district in Red Hook," Maya said, her voice a low hum as she traced the signal. "And he's not very happy. I embedded a little surprise in the file. It just wiped his primary hard drive." Damien grabbed his phone and called his head of security, a formidable ex-military man named Marcus. "Marcus, I have an address for you. And a name. Janice. I want him found. Now." While they waited for Marcus's team to move in, an overwhelming exhaustion finally washed over Maya. Her head drooped and her eyes started to close. "Hey," Damien said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it. You can rest now." She just nodded, too tired to speak. He gently guided her from the chair and led her to the plush sofa in the corner of the office. She collapsed onto it, asleep almost before her head hit the cushion. He took off his own suit jacket and carefully draped it over her. He stood there for a long moment, just watching her sleep. He looked at her face, softened in slumber. The fierce warrior, now a vulnerable, exhausted woman. The protective urge he felt was so powerful it was a physical ache in his chest. He had seen her at her strongest, a digital force of nature, and now seeing her like this, so completely trusting and unguarded in his home, he knew he was lost. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch as light as a whisper. She stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring his name. Damien. His heart stopped. He leaned in closer, his own heart pounding. He shouldn't. This wasn't the time. She was exhausted, vulnerable, but he couldn't help himself. He leaned down, his lips just a fraction of an inch from hers, and was about to close the distance when his phone buzzed violently on the desk. He flinched back, a curse on his lips. It was Marcus. "We got him," Marcus's voice said, crisp and professional. "Janice is in custody, and he's singing like a canary." Damien closed his eyes, a wave of triumph and frustration washing over him at the same time. He looked back at Maya, still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the victory she had just secured, and of the kiss that had been stolen away by the very justice she had been fighting for. "I'm on my way," Damien said into the phone, his voice a low growl. The fight wasn't over, but now they had a weapon, and Peterson had no idea what was coming for him. The interrogation of Janice, a surprisingly non-threatening computer nerd named Kevin, was short and sweet. Faced with a mountain of digital evidence Maya had provided and the very real threat of a long prison sentence, Kevin gave up Peterson in under an hour. He provided encrypted chat logs, crypto wallet transaction IDs, and a detailed account of every job Peterson had hired him for, from the initial hack on Vance Innovations to the vandalism of Maya's bakery. The district attorney's office, armed with an ironclad case, moved fast. The next morning, as Peterson was enjoying an espresso at a sidewalk cafe, two detectives quietly approached his table. "Mr. Peterson," one of them said calmly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, destruction of property, and multiple violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." Peterson's face went from smug to ashen in a matter of seconds. The photo of him being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, made the front page of the online edition of the New York Post before he even reached the police station. Damien was in his penthouse, watching the news unfold on TV, when Maya woke up. She stretched, rubbing her eyes, the events of the previous night feeling like a fever dream. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice groggy with sleep. He didn't speak. He just pointed to the TV. On the screen was Peterson's face, a look of pure shock as he was pushed into the back of a police car. The headline read, "Former Vance exec arrested in corporate sabotage plot." "We got him," Damien said simply. Maya stared at the screen, a slow, beautiful smile spreading across her face. It was a smile of relief, of justice, of a heavy weight finally being lifted. "We got him," she repeated, her voice full of a quiet, powerful satisfaction. She stood up and walked over to him, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "For what? You did all the work." "For believing in me," she said, her voice soft, "for being there." They stood in the quiet of the living room, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The crisis was over. The monsters had been vanquished, and all that was left was the two of them. "About last night," he began, his voice a little hesitant, "when I was about to, on the sofa." "I know," she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I wasn't really asleep." His eyes widened. "You weren't?" "Not completely," she admitted with a mischievous smile. "I was just wondering how long it was going to take you." He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "You are an impossible woman, Maya Cruz." "And you," she said, stepping closer and wrapping her arms around his neck, "are a surprisingly patient man." "My patience," he murmured, his hands finding her waist and pulling her close, "has just run out." He kissed her, and this time there were no interruptions. It was a long, slow, and deeply satisfying kiss that was a celebration of everything they had overcome. It was a kiss that sealed their partnership, their friendship, and the brilliant, chaotic, and undeniable love that had grown between them in the midst of a digital war. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "So," she said, her voice a playful whisper, "now that I've saved your company twice, and we've put the villain in jail, does this mean I finally get my own parking spot at the office?" He laughed, resting his forehead against hers. "Maya," he said, his voice full of a love that was as vast as the city spread out below them, "you can have the whole damn company." The arrest of Peterson was like a storm that, after its violent passage, leaves behind a clean, rain-washed world. The cloud of suspicion over Vance Innovations dissipated, and in its place, a new legend was born. The story of the brilliant pizza girl who became the company's unexpected savior, and the CEO who was smart enough to recognize her genius. For Maya and Damien, life settled into a rhythm that was a beautiful, chaotic, and utterly joyful symphony. Their relationship, no longer a secret, became the company's favorite real-life romantic comedy. They were a team, both in and out of the office. He'd show up at her apartment with bags of groceries, determined to learn how to cook something other than burnt toast. She, in turn, would help him with his speeches for foundation events, replacing his dry corporate jargon with stories that were funny, human, and deeply moving. "You can't just say synergistic growth models," she'd tell him, editing his notes with a red pen. "You have to say, we're helping people build their dreams, one crazy idea at a time. People connect with dreams, Damien, not with buzzwords." He'd just smile and watch her, completely captivated. "You're right." As always, the Sweet Bite was being rebuilt, better and more beautiful than before, funded by a generous insurance payout and an anonymous donation from a Vance charity that Maya pretended not to know came directly from Damien. He would spend his weekends there with her, covered in sawdust, trying to help. His attempts at manual labor were still hilariously inept, but he was present, he was trying, and that meant more to her than anything. Their love was easy, comfortable, and deep. It was built not on grand romantic gestures, but on the quiet, everyday moments. The shared laughter over a burnt dinner, the comfortable silence as they worked side by side, the way he'd look at her from across a crowded room with an expression of such profound adoration, it made her heart ache. They were in their bubble, a perfect world of their own making. And they had completely forgotten that the world outside, the world Damien had come from, was still watching. The summons came on a crisp autumn morning. Damien was in a board meeting presenting the company's record-breaking quarterly profits, a direct result of the new positive image Maya had helped cultivate, when his private phone, the one only his family had the number for, began to vibrate. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. With a sigh, he excused himself. "I'll be right back." He answered the call in the hallway. "Yes?" "Damien." The voice on the other end was cold, elegant, and carried an authority that made even the billionaire CEO instinctively straighten his posture. It was his mother, Beatrice Vance. "We are having dinner tonight, at the estate, 8 p.m. Don't be late." It wasn't a request, it was a royal command. "Mother," he said, his tone instantly more formal. "Tonight is a bit short notice, I have plans." "Cancel them," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We have family matters to discuss, important ones, and bring your project." Damien felt a cold knot form in his stomach. His mother never used a person's name when she disapproved of them. She reduced them to a thing, a project, an inconvenience. "Her name is Maya," he said, his voice tight. "I'm aware," Beatrice replied, her tone dismissive. 8 o'clock, Damien. I expect you both to be punctual." She hung up. Damien stood in the hallway, the phone still pressed to his ear, a feeling of dread washing over him. He had faced down hackers, corporate traitors, and a hostile board, but none of it compared to the quiet, iron-willed tyranny of his own mother. The Vance family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was less a home and more a museum. It was a sprawling, Georgian-style mansion filled with priceless antiques, perfectly manicured gardens, and a suffocating silence that clung to the air like dust. It was the house of ticking clocks Damien had told her about, and Maya felt a chill as they drove through the imposing iron gates. "Are you okay?" she asked, placing a hand on his arm. He had been tense and quiet the entire drive. "Just preparing for battle," he said with a grim smile. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "Just be yourself, and no matter what she says, don't let her get to you. She feeds on insecurity." "Don't worry," Maya said with a confidence she didn't quite feel. "I've handled worse than a grumpy rich lady." Beatrice Vance greeted them in the grand foyer. She was a tall, impossibly elegant woman in her late 60s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair, a string of pearls, and eyes as cold and hard as the diamonds on her fingers. She looked Maya up and down, her gaze a slow, dismissive appraisal that took in her simple but elegant dress, her lack of expensive jewelry, and her quiet, dignified posture. "So," Beatrice said, her voice a silken weapon, "you're the pizza girl." Maya didn't flinch. She met the older woman's gaze and extended a hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance. And yes, I used to deliver pizzas. Now I run a division of your son's company that increased its philanthropic impact by 300%. She gave a sweet, disarming smile. I'm also pretty good at baking. You should try my cupcakes sometime. Beatrice was momentarily taken aback by her directness and lack of intimidation. She ignored Maya's outstretched hand. Dinner is served, she said, turning and gliding towards the dining room. The dinner was an excruciating affair. It was just the three of them at a table long enough to seat 20, surrounded by silent, uniformed staff. Beatrice steered the conversation with surgical precision, asking pointed questions about Maya's humble background, her limited education, and her family, all while maintaining a facade of polite curiosity. So your grandmother raised you? Beatrice asked, delicately cutting her filet mignon. How quaint. And she worked as a maid, I believe your file said? Damien's hand tightened on his fork. Mother, that's enough. I'm simply getting to know the woman my son has become so distracted by, Beatrice replied, not taking her eyes off Maya. Tell me, dear, was it always your plan to find a wealthy man to solve your financial problems? Actually, Maya said, setting her own fork down and looking Beatrice straight in the eye, her voice calm and even. My plan was to build my own business from the ground up, with my own two hands, which I did. The fact that I fell in love with your son was an unexpected and very complicated bonus. The sheer audacity of her response left Beatrice speechless for a second. Love. Beatrice repeated the word as if it were a foreign, distasteful concept. Damien, my son, does not have the luxury of love. He has a duty to this family, to our name, to our legacy. She finally turned her full, icy attention to Damien. This entanglement ends tonight. It's not an entanglement, Mother, Damien said, his voice low and firm. I love her. Beatrice let out a small, humorless laugh. Don't be a fool. You are infatuated with a novelty, a project. You saved her, and that makes you feel powerful. But she does not belong in our world. She is a temporary amusement, and it is time for that amusement to end. She's not going anywhere, Damien said, his voice rising. Oh, she is, Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Or you are. What does that mean? Beatrice placed her napkin on the table, her movements precise and final. It means you have a choice, Damien. You end this ridiculous affair, you come back to your senses, and you resume your life as a Vance. Or you continue with her. She waved a dismissive hand in Maya's direction, and you are no longer a part of this family. You will be cut off. From the inheritance, from the company shares held in the family trust, from our name. You will be on your own, with nothing but your salary and your pizza girl. The ultimatum hung in the suffocating silence of the dining room. It was the ultimate weapon, the one Beatrice had held in reserve her entire life. She was forcing him to choose between the world he was born into and the woman who had taught him how to live. Maya's heart was pounding. She looked at Damien, whose face had gone pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw. She saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of a lifetime of expectation crashing down on him. She knew what this meant. It wasn't just about money. It was about his identity, his history, everything he had ever been. She reached under the table and squeezed his hand, a silent message of support. It's okay. Whatever you choose, it's okay. Damien looked from his mother's cold, unyielding face to Maya's, filled with a quiet, unwavering strength. He saw his past and his future sitting at the same table. And in that moment, he knew there was no choice at all. He stood up, pulling Maya to her feet beside him. He looked at his mother, his eyes no longer filled with the old, familiar fear of her disapproval, but with a new, calm resolve. Then I guess, he said, his voice clear and steady, that I am no longer a Vance. He kept his hand tightly clasped with Maya's. Because I will not, for 1 second, choose a legacy of cold, empty rooms over a lifetime of warmth with this woman. He turned to Maya. Let's go home, he said. They walked out of the dining room, out of the grand, silent mansion, leaving Beatrice Vance sitting alone at her long, empty table, her perfect world finally, irrevocably, cracked. As they drove away back towards the city, Maya was silent, her mind reeling. Are you sure? She asked, her voice a whisper. Damien, your family, your name. He reached over and took her hand, bringing it to his lips and kissing her knuckles. You are my family, he said simply. And your name is the only one I care about. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in her life, Maya Cruz wasn't crying because she was hurt or scared. She was crying because she was loved, fiercely and unconditionally, by a man who was willing to give up a kingdom for her. Back in New York, they entered the penthouse, which now felt less like a glass tower and more like a sanctuary. "She thinks she can break us," Maya said, her voice now filled with a steely resolve. "She thinks her money and her name give her power over you." "She's wrong," Damien said, pulling her into his arms. "I know," Maya said, looking up at him, a fire in her eyes, "and I think it's time we showed her just how wrong she is." A slow, daring smile spread across her face. "The Vance Foundation Charity Gala is in 2 weeks, right?" Damien's eyes widened as he understood what she was suggesting. It was the biggest society event of the year, his mother's crowning achievement. "You're not thinking." "Oh, I am," she said, her smile turning predatory. "Your mother wanted a show. Let's give her one she'll never forget." The 2 weeks leading up to the Vance Foundation Charity Gala were a silent, cold war. Damien and his mother communicated only through terse emails via their assistants. The ultimatum hung in the air, unspoken but absolute. The New York Society pages buzzed with rumors. Damien Vance and the mysterious pizza girl were on the rocks. A family rift was imminent. Beatrice, confident she had won, proceeded with the gala preparations, certain her son would eventually come to his senses and fall back in line. She had no idea she was planning her own public execution. Damien and Maya, meanwhile, had become a seamless unit. They spent their days at Vance Innovations, working together to solidify the company's new, more humane direction. They spent their nights in Damien's penthouse, which was slowly being transformed by Maya's presence. A small, chaotic herb garden appeared on the balcony. Cookbooks began to fill the empty shelves in the state-of-the-art kitchen. The silent house was slowly finding its voice. "Are you ready for this?" Maya asked him the night of the gala. She was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps of a stunning deep blue gown that Damien had insisted on buying for her. It was elegant, but understated. It was perfectly her. "Ready to face the dragon in her own lair?" he said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He was impeccable in a black tuxedo, but his eyes, when they met hers in the mirror, were full of a quiet resolve. "I've never been more ready." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "You're not nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted with a shaky laugh. "I feel like I'm about to deliver a pizza to the Queen of England. But," she added, turning in his arms to face him, "I'm not alone this time." "Never again," he said, kissing her softly. "Tonight is not about them, Maya. It's about us. It's about our story." The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a glittering sea of old money and new ambition. Beatrice Vance stood at the entrance, a regal ice queen, greeting senators and socialites. When Damien and Maya arrived, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to them. Damien held Maya's hand, his grip firm and reassuring, as he led her through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and the curious stares. "Damien," Beatrice's voice was like a shard of ice as they approached. She gave Maya a look of pure venom before turning to her son. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable." "I'm always reasonable, Mother," Damien replied coolly. "I'm just not always obedient." He led Maya to their table without another word, leaving Beatrice fuming. The evening progressed as a perfectly choreographed performance of wealth and power. Speeches were made, donations were announced, and the polite, meaningless chatter of high society filled the air. Finally, the master of ceremonies stepped to the podium. "And now, it is my great honor to introduce the man whose vision continues to guide the Vance Foundation, our CEO, Mr. Damien Vance." A round of polite applause filled the room as Damien made his way to the stage. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. He saw his mother in the front row, a small, triumphant smile on her face, certain he was about to announce his return to the fold. His eyes scanned the room until he found Maya. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. A silent message, "I'm with you." He took a deep breath. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and clear. "For years, the Vance Foundation has been a pillar of this community, supporting the arts, funding museums, and preserving a legacy of beautiful, silent things." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But a legacy is not something you preserve, it's something you build. And tonight, I am here to announce a new direction for our foundation. A new legacy." Beatrice's smile faltered. This was not the speech they had rehearsed. "A few months ago," Damien continued, his voice now more personal, more passionate, "my company was on the brink of collapse. My team of experts was helpless, and my entire empire was saved by a pizza delivery girl." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. "That's not a joke," Damien said, his gaze sweeping the room. "It's the truth, and it's the most important business lesson I have ever learned." He looked directly at Maya, his voice softening. "She taught me that genius isn't found in a diploma, but in a person's spirit. She taught me that integrity is worth more than any stock price. And she taught me that the most valuable assets we have are not our possessions, but our connections to each other." He turned his attention back to the stunned audience. "The woman you have been whispering about, the pizza girl from the tabloids, is named Maya Cruz. She had to give up a scholarship to MIT to care for her sick grandmother. She worked 3 jobs, delivered pizzas, and never once lost her dignity or her belief in the good of people. Her story is not a scandal. It is a story of heroism, and it is a story that this foundation will now be dedicated to honoring." Beatrice had gone pale, her hand gripping her pearl necklace. "Effective immediately," Damien announced, his voice ringing with a power that had nothing to do with money. "The Vance Foundation is being restructured and renamed. 100% of its new funding will go towards providing scholarships and grants for students who, like Maya, have had to put their education on hold to care for their families." He looked straight at his mother, his expression unyielding. "The new name of this organization will be the Elena Garcia Project, in honor of Maya's late grandmother, a woman who taught her that you don't need money to be rich." The silence in the room was absolute. Damien had just taken his family's most prized institution, their symbol of status and power, and publicly repurposed it, dedicating it to the values of a woman his mother had deemed unworthy. It was a public, total, and glorious act of rebellion. It was his ultimate sacrifice. Beatrice looked as if she had been slapped. Her empire of influence had just been dismantled in front of everyone who mattered to her. Then one person started to clap. It was Mr. Harrington, the old conservative board member. He stood up, his applause slow and deliberate. Then another person stood. And another. Within a minute, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving a thunderous standing ovation, not for the CEO of Vance Innovations, but for the man who had just chosen love and purpose over power and legacy. Damien stepped down from the stage, walked through the applauding crowd, and went directly to Maya. He took her hand and led her out of the ballroom, leaving the world of whispers and judgments behind them forever. They didn't speak on the drive back to the city. There were no words for what had just happened. When they arrived at the cabin by the lake 2 hours later, the moon was high, casting a silver path across the water. The air was crisp and clean. He led her out to the deck, the same spot where he had first confessed his love. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "Rename the foundation, give up your family." "Give up?" he said, turning to face her. He took her hands in his. "Maya, I didn't give anything up. I just chose. For the first time in my life, I chose my own family. I chose my own legacy." He looked into her eyes, his own shining with an emotion so deep it was bottomless. "My house has been silent for so long. It was a house full of ticking clocks, a house full of ghosts. Since you came into my life, it started to fill with sound, with your laughter, with your terrible singing while you bake." She laughed through her tears. "I want to fill it with a lifetime of those sounds, Maya." He got down on one knee, right there under the moonlit sky. He opened the small velvet box he had been carrying all night. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, the diamond catching the moonlight like a captured star. "Maya Cruz," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the bravest, wisest, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You are my partner, my conscience, my home. Will you do me the profound honor of being my wife?" "Yes," she sobbed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes, you fool. Of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that sealed their past, their present, and all their tomorrows. Epilogue: 3 years later. The once silent Vance mansion was anything but. The sound of a child's gleeful shrieks echoed through the grand hallways as a 2-year-old boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's unruly dark hair chased a golden retriever across the marble floors. In the kitchen, a warm, inviting space now perpetually dusted with flour, Maya was showing a group of 10 aspiring young bakers how to perfectly fold dough for a croissant. The sweet bite had become a beloved Brooklyn institution, but Maya's true passion was now the Elena Garcia project. As its executive director, she had built it into a national powerhouse, helping thousands of students get a second chance at their dreams. Damien walked in, no longer in a suit, but in a comfortable sweater, holding their 6-month-old daughter in his arms. He came up behind Maya and wrapped his free arm around her waist, watching the students with a proud smile. "How's the next generation of baking geniuses?" he murmured in her ear. "They're almost as good as their teacher," she teased, leaning back against him. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together in the living room, in front of a roaring fire. The house was quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a peaceful, contented silence, filled with the warmth of a shared life. "You know," Damien said, taking her hand, "I was just thinking about that first day. The pizza, the hackers. Our very romantic beginning," she said with a laugh. "I was so angry that day," he admitted. "I thought my world was ending." She turned to him, her eyes soft. "And was it?" He smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "No," he said. "It was just beginning." He kissed her. A deep, loving kiss that held the comfortable intimacy of years spent together. In the quiet of their home, surrounded by the echoes of their children's laughter, the CEO and the pizza girl had found what neither of them knew they were looking for. A life that wasn't perfect, but was gloriously, beautifully, and completely real. What did you think of the story of Damien and Maya? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from a hacked server to a happy home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that true love can rewrite any code, please comment happily ever after. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.